video, I'm going to introduce you to the concept of chromatic chords, some chords that you can use that are outside of the key. Now, when I talk about this, I almost hesitate to use the word chromatic chords because we're not really stepping very far outside of a key. And so the word that is better used to describe this type of chord is borrowed chords, because what we're actually going to do is borrow some chords from a very close key. So first of all, what I've done here is written up the chords that you would find in C major. These are the chords that if I were to write up the C major scale and put triads above each of the notes, I would end up with this series of chords. If I were to do the same thing, but start on C and do C minor, I would end up with these chords. These are the chords I would find above a C minor scale. Now this is allowing for a few things. The leading tone has been raised, so we have a major 5 chord here. You know, I've kind of allowed for a few things. This E flat chord, I've not raised the leading tone here, otherwise it would be an E flat augmented chord, remember, because that's, again, the way the chord progression works. So in major and in minor, we have these two sets of chords. The point with borrowing is that it is possible to add interest and color to your harmony and to your chord progressions that you could borrow while in major from minor or in minor from major. Borrowing can go on back and forth. Wherever there is a difference, you can borrow. You could be in C major and you could borrow a minor 4 chord. And that adds a really interesting color to a chord progression that would otherwise have a major 4 chord. You can be in C major and borrow the 6 chord, have an A flat chord. That adds a really interesting color because suddenly you've got a major 6 chord that's just a little bit flat. It's just a little bit, it's created on a note, the A flat, that you don't expect in C major. And so it creates a wonderful, bright, vibrant color all of a sudden in the key of C major, which is already quite vibrant and bright. So you can imagine you've added another layer of brightness and vibrancy to it. You can do the same the other way, although I have to say it is much more often that major is borrowing from minor, but it is not impossible that you could be writing in a minor key and you could decide to borrow a few things from major and see if that works. So the concept of borrowing or borrowed chords is one that is quite often used in rock and pop style. Certainly it's used quite a lot in earlier time periods in classical music, and it's something you should bear in mind. Obviously, you don't borrow what you already have, but where there are differences, you certainly can borrow between the keys, and I think that that is going to be a way to add interest and vibrancy and a new kind of harmonic dynamic to your chord progressions. So think about ways that you might use borrowed chords. One thing I would say about borrowed chords is when you borrow them, you generally borrow them at the same time you would use the chord you already have. So if you have a chord progression that goes 1, 4, 5, 1 in major, and you want to borrow a chord from minor, then you're probably, the only option you're really going to have here is to borrow where you would use the 4 chord in major, you would borrow instead the 4 chord in minor. And this would become a borrowed chord. We actually show this by putting a little slash in BC to say it's a borrowed chord for analysis. But at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about. So you find your chord progressions that work in major, the chord progressions that you would normally have in major, and that are solid and good and work, and you take those chord progressions and you would just simply insert a borrowed chord from minor in place of the chord that you have that would normally be there from major. So what was 1 major 4 5 1 becomes 1 minor 4 5 1, borrowing this chord from minor. The technical term for this would be that you are borrowing from the parallel minor. That is to say, remember, both these keys share the same tonic note. They are not, this is not the relative minor that we're borrowing from, this is the parallel minor. So C major borrows from C minor, D major borrows from D minor, E minor borrows from E major, or whichever way you're doing it, it is the same tonic note. So it's parallel major that borrows from each other. But the concept of borrowed chords is simply borrowing from your parallel alternative.